Mastery is about getting better at something. So let's take a look at how traditional marks-based assessment works compared to mastery-based assessment. We're going to look at traditional reports versus mastery reports for 3 different students. The first one is Seamus Finnegan. If we take a look at Seamus's traditional report, you can see Seamus has 74.63%, and you can see all of the different results for all of the different projects, quizzes, and tests that Seamus did. That's great, but what can he do with this information? Well, I guess he could take a look at the 74.63% and he could say, well, this is good enough. This will carry me over, and by the end of the semester, I'll be good. If Seamus was a different type of student, he might look at that and go, oh my gosh, I need more percentage. So I need to go ask my teacher, how can I get some bonus points or make up for stuff or whatever it is to add up to close to 100%, let's say. So that's Seamus's goal. He wants to get more marks. So there really isn't much talk about learning here. It's more about focusing on trying to get more marks. Let's take a look at a mastery report for Seamus. So here we have the same students, Seamus Finnegan, but you can see that all of his results are based on learning targets. So if you look at the mastery reports format for Seamus, you can see that everything's broken up not by the assignment or by percentages or marks, but it's kind of focused on all the different curricular learning targets in the course. These are all the learning targets that I've highlighted here, all the I can statements. And then underneath each one, you can see all of the evidence that we've collected over time, all the quizzes, assignments, projects, etc. Really, they're all the same. They're all assessments to try to gather evidence for whether Seamus understands these different learning targets or not. And you can see the goal using this kind of format is a little bit different. There is no overall mark. So the focus is more on improvement of these different learning targets. And you can see Seamus did a great job of coming back to do a reassessment on each of these learning targets, which he may have been poor on previously. So you can see for the second learning target here, I can demonstrate the ability to transform from animate to inanimate object. We're talking about Hogwarts here. He started off with a baseline quiz getting 1.0. That is beginning. And you can see a whole string of developing here. But he did do a reassessment at the end and proved that he is able to master this learning target. Sometimes it takes a while to master something. Quite often it takes a while to master something, but the idea is to make sure you fail forward and learn from your mistakes, gather more information, practice a little bit more, and then show evidence that you really understand it in the end. So this is what Seamus has done. So using a report format like this, it's more focused on the learning of the different learning targets and less on how to add up to 100%. Let's take a look at another couple examples. Here we have Neville Longbottom. Neville's already got 86.34%, which at Hogwarts is a B. At Bellevue, that would be an A. You can see all of this one is Neville Longbottom. Neville Longbottom has 86.34%, which is terrific. So again, Neville can take a look at that and say, hey, that is, well, at Hogwarts, this is a B. At Bellevue, that would be an A. So hey, I've got an A. I don't care about anything else. But if we just left it like that, imagine all of the learning that is lost. So if you take a look at mastery-based assessment for Neville, it is pretty clear that for some of the learning targets, these ones in particular, he's already mastered these. At Neville's mastery report, you can see that, yeah, he is doing quite well all the way through on several different learning targets. Maybe not at the beginning. You can see some beginning, competent, beginning. But this really helps you look at some of the areas that he needs to focus on. So we've got a string of competent and beginning here. We've got some competent beginning. So these ones he would have worked on throughout the year in order to get some good end results. You can see final exam here, you got mastery. Final exam, competent. So he came back for a reassessment and got mastery. So the focus, again, it's all about the process, and the focus here is on learning and on mastering those skills. We'll take a look at one more. Here's Ginny Weasley. So again, Ginny Weasley, 94%. You know, a student might look at that and go, well, I don't really need to work really hard for the rest of the semester. That would be a problem, because that just means that the motivation's not there to, you know, learn anything more or challenge oneself. So if you take a look at the mastery report for Ginny Weasley, you can see that Ginny's done really well. And indeed, you can see though that on this particular learning target, I can make objects vanish successfully. Final exam and reassessment are both competent. So we might take a look at that and maybe do another reassessment for Ginny. Maybe she can actually get that to a mastery. So there's always room for improvement. It depends on what you want to focus on. In the traditional report, it really focuses on marks. Whereas for mastery reports, we try to focus on mastery and trying to improve. Let's talk about learning targets. At the beginning of each course, in the creation of the course, we take a look at what is important for that course. What are the curricular targets in the ministry documents, in the curriculum? And what are some of the important things in our department, as a science department or engineering or ADST department or whatever course you're taking? What are the important curricular targets? This helps us focus both as a teacher and for students to focus on what needs to be accomplished. So that is why mastery reports are broken down into different learning targets. We really want to track those learning targets over time to see how much you have improved. Every assessment, whether it's a test or a quiz or project or homework assignment or whatever you want to call those, I look at them all as the same thing. They're just methods to gather good evidence. And on each of these different assessments, we have a rubric. The reason why we have a rubric is so that we can track how a student did on each different learning target. So before I create an assessment, I always look at what are the different learning targets I am assessing. So that sets a goal, and that is presented to the student on every assessment so that they know what is the goal. So as a student, you would take a look at the different learning targets on the assessment, and then those are your focuses. Your job is to demonstrate your ability on these different learning targets. So for this particular rubric, you can see that it's assessing 3 different learning targets. So that means throughout this project or test or whatever you're doing as an assessment, you are focused on demonstrating and giving good evidence that you have mastered these 3 different learning targets. So in the end, when I take a look at it or evaluate it, I will take a look and say, well, for conjuring objects, you've got competent. transfiguring from one human to the other. You're able to do it very consistently, so that would be mastery. Whereas competent is you're able to do it, but maybe not as consistently. I can untransfigure. Maybe you can't change objects back to the way they were. So that might be beginning. Beginning would mean that you can barely do it. At surface level, you have a lot of misunderstanding. You're really not able to do it. Developing shows some promise that you're able to do it a few times, but just needs more practice. So that's kind of how rubrics work. We would take that rubric, take all the evidence in the rubric, and put it in with all the other evidence that we have, and then that becomes your mastery report. Let's take a look at what you would do with a mastery report. So once you get your mastery report, and this is a mastery report for somebody named Katie Bell in Transfiguration 101. So Katie would look at this mastery report and wow, it looks like Katie's doing really well on all of her learning targets. So you can see that everything's reached mastery for each of these learning targets. If I take a look at how the progression works, it's gone from beginning, competent, all the way to mastery by the end of the course. So you can see Katie Bell really doesn't need to do much at this point. Perhaps along the way, Katie got, you can see a developing here that Katie got on one of her assessments. So developing on this one here, vanishment of inanimate objects. So that might be something that she'd be concerned about. But you can see that she made up for it later on. So how you work with a mastery report, let me just switch to somebody who might be having a little bit more difficulty. So if you look at Vincent Crabb's mastery report, you can see Vincent has some things missing. So X means that these things were never turned in. So you can see some X's there, some beginning. Usually I would put an M for a learning target that I wasn't fully able to evaluate because there was nothing there or part of it was missing, whereas an X means it was never turned in at all. So that's the difference between X and M. But for Vincent Crabb, he really needs to do some goal setting here and some reassessment and set aside some time after school or during flex time to come in and try to make up for all these things that he's missing, first of all, and turn in the stuff that he's missing. So there's a lot to highlight there for Vincent Crabb. If you look at Roger Davies, we can highlight a few things here. So what Roger would do is he would take his highlighter and take a look at some of the weak areas, weak learning targets, like for example, this one here. I can transfigure from one human form to another. You can see on the final exam, he got developing. He started with a baseline quiz that had beginning. So there's some difficulties with that one. So having it highlighted would help him because later on he can come in during flex time or after school and have this all highlighted and ask his teacher for help and then do a reassessment. You can see for the last learning target here as well, we've got some beginning on the final exam. So all of these can be reassessed and fixed up. The other ones seem to be pretty okay. We've got overall, I would say, competent or mastery, mostly competent for the other learning targets. But primarily, if you were to prioritize, looking at Roger Davies here, the bottom two learning targets would be priority to get to mastery or close to mastery. The other ones would come later on if you wanted to come to flex time or after school and to do some reassessments. So just a word on reassessments. Students can take any of their learning targets, highlight them, and come in for a reassessment. That means, usually, what that means is they come in, they have their learning targets highlighted, the ones that they're weak on. They've come in for help already, or they're coming in for help. And then once they get to the reassessment, all they're doing is they're trying to show more evidence, better evidence, of having learned those learning targets. So hopefully having reached mastery. So with that, they would come in and they would demonstrate, usually orally, or sometimes I will ask students to draw a diagram or answer some questions, or maybe show other evidence that they can produce of their mastery of certain skills or learning in the curriculum. Those reassessments can happen all the way to the end of the course. I encourage students to do them as quickly as possible, as early as possible, because sometimes they forget throughout the course. So by the end of the course, there's usually quite a number of people who are trying to do reassessments, and there may not be as much time as earlier on the course. So reassessments can happen as many times as possible until students understand or can show understanding and evidence that they have mastered the targets. Something really important to look at is the self-assessment. What this is a document that students have the opportunity to use and take a look at their mastery reports, highlight weaknesses, and then make some goals. So if you look at the questions on this document, it really focuses on some of the weaknesses and what they plan to do about it. This kind of gets them to think about using their mastery reports as an action document, as opposed to something that they just look at and then put away. So that's really important. Once we get to the end of the semester, what we want to do is to establish a final grade. This works in different ways depending on the level at high school. So if some of the junior students, they would be getting a proficiency scale. So proficiency scales range from emerging to extending, whereas some of the senior grades, they will get percentages still. So here's an example of something we might do at the end of the semester. They might get this document, and then we would go through it and say, okay, overall they did this in this unit, overall something there, something like this. And then to figure out the percentage at the end, I would have a conversation with them, one-on-one conversation. We would decide where they would lie depending on how many masteries or competence they got. So this might be somebody who has something like 83% or 86%, depending on the quality of the evidence and how close to mastery they were. If you take a look at the proficiency scale, it's very much the same, except in the end, they would end up with something between, in this case, proficient and extending. So we might say proficient overall. Again, that depends on ministry reporting guidelines, and at this point, juniors would receive something between emerging and extending, whereas the higher grades will receive a percentage.